The games are over today here in the Institute of Engineering Technology, where the candidates are being played, and there was just one decisive game in round 4, and that was the game between Magnus Carlsen and Alexander Grischuk, and that's the one I'm going to be looking at now. So Carlsen played boldly today with e4, none of this English stuff, and I think he's hoping perhaps for a repeat of his game against Grischuk from the Tar Memorial last year, where he almost pushed him over the edge in a Spanish. So we've got a Spanish again today. Berlin defence, Carlsen's gone d3 to protect the pawn on e4, a very modest continuation, but it keeps all the tension in the position. Typical Carlsen. And Grischuk also played aggressively by playing the bishop out to c5. Okay, these are very normal moves, and now again a modest move from Carlsen, playing h3. He'd like to play rook e1, and h3 will prevent the knight coming to g4. a6 from Grischuk. You could drop the bishop back here, but Carlsen took on c6 very, very quickly indeed. It's interesting how decisive he is. He makes these decisions so quickly. After the game, Carlsen said that he didn't really know the theory. But he's got a decent position. And now, for example, if bishop b6, then knight f1 and bishop e3, a little better for white. But Grischuk played a very bold move indeed, d5. Now this is very double-edged. Of course, that it opens up the position, trying to get at the weak pawn here on d3, and maybe opening the position up for the bishop. But it does leave this pawn here rather weak. That can no longer be protected by coming to c5 by a pawn on d6. So, but very dynamic, really unbalances the play. Carlsen took on d5. Now, of course, if pawn takes, then white wins a pawn. So you have to play queen takes d5, but you can see now that those pawns are split and isolated. But black has gained something too. He has more space in the center, and the pawn is potentially a little weak, but Carlsen again found a very nice plan very quickly. Attacking the bishop really has to move back. And now c4 looks a bit odd to sort of leave yourself with this backward pawn, but in fact an excellent move, because now the queen has to keep defending the e-pawn, and that rather treads on the toes of the bishop, so it's a little bit awkward. And bishop e3 is a nice move, just threatening to move into c5. So Grischuk had to play knight to d7, but you can see black's pieces stand rather awkwardly. If black had time, he would love to play c5, maybe a5 as well, and get this bishop onto the long diagonal. Then he'd be doing well. So Carlsen appreciated this, seized the moment, and played d4. It makes sense to open up the position, for example, like this. White's ahead in development, those pawns are still split, no doubt about it, white stands a bit better. So I think Grischuk, well, he thought for a very long time here. There was such a contrast between the two players. Carlsen thinking very clearly and quickly, and Grischuk playing very slowly indeed. Finally he played e4. Now it's a very committal move. You know, white can look forward to attacking these potentially weak pawns on the queen side. White has a center here, very nice, but black has potentially a very nice kingside pawn majority. So very double-edged indeed. a5 from Grischuk, good move. Be nice to drive that knight away. Carlsen played a4. Now there's the potential later on to use those weaknesses on the b file. Grischuk played f5 here, and he admitted after the game that he rather overestimated his position. Carlsen expected queen g6, and this does look like a better move. If white plays as in the game with c5, then black has a very good position. That opens up the bishop. You can see the difference when the pawn stands on f7 to f5. Here, the bishop on c8 comes into play, and there's already an attack on the king. So probably bishop f4, and well, the difference is white hasn't played c5, so black can get this bishop into the game, and after the exchange, well, I'd say the position is about even. But Grischuk played f5, which is a very tempting move to try to roll these pawns down the board. But Carlsen, again, very quickly found an excellent idea to counter this. He played c5, which looks slightly anti-positional to give up this square. But in fact, well, let's see what happens. Makes room for the knight. And, well, it's interesting. Strategically, Carlsen is really switched on, but tactically too. Look what happens after queen f7. Very dangerous move. Hitting the knight, and if, let's say, knight takes pawn, then, whoop, fantastic initiative for black. But in fact, there's a very good move. Queen c1, controlling the knight, and protecting the knight, and preventing f4. So, you have to be really switched on in this difficult position. Knight f6 from Grischuk. Now he would still like to play f4, opening up that bishop, but now an excellent move from Carlsen. Now it would be very tempting to play a move like knight e5, but here black sacks the exchange, and I think has decent compensation here. Carlsen didn't get involved in that. He simply blockaded the f-pawn, an excellent move, and that means that this bishop struggles to get into the game onto the king's side. Knight e5, and again, if the bishop moves, then f4 is again very dangerous. So Carlsen simply protected that bishop, and it's very hard now for black to roll forward on the king's side, which means that white has a free hand to go for the queen side. Okay, bishop e6 played, knight takes a5. Now, after the game, Carlsen felt that black should have played like this, and this is still very double-edged indeed. By this point, well, Grischuk was extremely short of time, and this is interesting. But what I find interesting is that Carlsen kept declining to going for, kept declining to take easy material here. So, for example, he could have played knight takes c6, but that would result in a position which is very, very unbalanced. I mean, who knows what's going on here? Two bishops against a rook and two pawns. Black maybe has an attack. Maybe those pawns are too strong. Who knows? But Carlsen played more solidly, actually. Knight e5 was played, so the queen has to move. And now, again, Carlsen was very tactically aware, because if bishop g5 looks like it traps the queen, e3 is an excellent counter. And if, well, it's a very, very complicated position, but if bishop takes pawn, then f4 actually traps the bishop. It's more complicated than that, but still, we've got to avoid that. So Carlsen, again, very coolly just dropped the bishop back, avoiding any trouble at all. If the pawn advances now, well, the e-pawn is on prise. Grischuk, I think by this moment, he had something like, well, a minute, 2 minutes left. Very short of time indeed. He sacked the exchange, probably a good practical decision, because Carlsen was about to take on c6 with 2 extra pawns. Now, I think objectively, black is lost here, but proving this in a practical game is not easy. But Carlsen was something like an hour ahead on the clock, and, well, he was very cool indeed. Instead of trying to blitz Grischuk, push him over the edge, because Grischuk only had something like 30 seconds left to get to move 40, still 15 moves to make. Carlsen just sat there and calculated and worked it all out. He played rook b1. Excellent move. If the rooks are exchanged, then that makes life a lot easier, getting rid of that dangerous rook. It now means that the queen can come back to d2 or e1 and protect the king's side. White must be winning. So Grischuk very quickly, well, he had to play very quickly, played the rook to a2. But now, again, fantastic calculation from Carlsen. You can't guess in this position. Black is threatening to break things open with e3. Carlsen played queen a6. Now of course, he would like to take on a6 and get through to the king. But he had to calculate this move, which Grischuk played instantly. But Carlsen had it all worked out. Watch this. This is great calculation. So he took, okay, this is scary. The second rank is exposed. Queen g5, threatening mate, threatening the pawn here. Rook e2. Carlsen had it under control. Now if rook takes, now this is an important variation, it looks like black is winning back the exchange, and if queen takes, queen e3 check, and black is well and truly back in the game. But there's this really important Zwischenzug, bishop f4. You hit the queen, and only then do you take on b1, and white must be winning with this extra a pawn. But Carlsen had to see that way back when he played queen a6. So okay, this position, knight a3, well here's another variation that Carlsen had to calculate. This is the game. Here, if you take exchange rooks and play rook b2, then the bishop bounces back to d5, and suddenly white's position is caving in. But Carlsen had seen this, and he just played knight f3. So the queen has to move, and only now did he take. Now the difference is, if the bishop goes back to d5, the knight defends, and something like queen e2, you just shut out black's attack. So this is the difference. Grischuk tried bishop c4. By this stage he had almost nothing on the clock, but his position is bust anyway. And now Carlsen simply brought his queen back to defend. f4 came. I mean, there's absolutely nothing. If the knight moves, then you just play rook f2. White is just the exchange up with this beautiful extra pawn. So f4 played, bishop takes, black is just bust here. And in this position, a clear exchange down. Grischuk actually resigned. He only had 4 seconds remaining, but anyway, he's completely bust in this position. Well, let's see what might happen. If the bishop retreats, then rook b2, we can slam the rook on b8, and suddenly we get through to the king. So, wonderful game from Carlsen. I think he proved today that he was, well, we've seen this tournament, you know, he's a master of endgame strategy, but we've also seen him to be a master of positional chess and a brilliant calculator too. So at the end of today, there are 2 players in the lead. We have Aronian and Carlsen on 3. Aronian drew very quickly with Svidler today. So they share the lead on 3 out of 4, and Svidler has 2.5 out of 4. Thanks for watching.